Microsoft is a technology company whose mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. Safe to say that over the past year, they have delivered just that, possibly beyond their boldest strategic plans. Hello from me, Roshni Gajjar, and thanks for listening to episode 16 of Lift as We Rise. Today, we are talking about the future of human capital with Jasmin Pillay, who is the Human Resource Consulting Director for Middle East and Africa at Microsoft. Jasmin, thank you for taking time to be here today. It's an absolute pleasure to be speaking to you.
Thanks for having me, Roshni. I'm delighted to be here. I was looking forward to this all week, actually.
Absolutely. Jasmin, last Thursday, we heard that there's now an indefinite delay in Microsoft employees in the US returning to the office. Tell us what's happening in Africa and other regions around the world.
So look, Microsoft has actually said quite openly that we won't be one of the first organizations to rush back, I think for two reasons, right? The first is safety, very, very concerned about the safety, the health and the well-being of our people. And the second piece is we're set up to actually work remotely very successfully. So that helps. But as a priority, we're going to look at country regulations, government regulations, and then, of course, wrap Microsoft's approach around that. So across Africa, actually, we're still pretty much mandatory work from home until such time as we start to see, that it's safer to allow that hybrid workplace flexibility to come in.
Jasmin, I think we must remember that as a tech company, you and your teams have had to adapt to this new normal as much as everyone else has. So I'm keen to get into it and hear more about how that has gone for you from an HR perspective at Microsoft. It's been a few years, Jasmin, since we wore the same company badge, if you can call it that, at Aspen Pharmacare. And you've continued to work with aspirational employers since. So Petronas for 6 years, and then you joined Microsoft in 2018. It sounds like you've had a really thriving decade. Share with us some highlights and also the road to Microsoft, as it were.
I think I was lucky as well, Roshni. I think there's a bit of hard work in there and a bit of luck as well, a bit of good fortune. But maybe just the road to Microsoft or the journey to Microsoft. So I'll take you back a few years, right? I started out in marketing, and then I moved into a public relations practice. And at that time, I dabbled in what I would say is modest IT as part of my role, very modest IT, I must add. And this PR practice, I keep talking about it, even though it's more than 20 years ago that I worked there, because it was at that point where I achieved one of my biggest growth spurts, not just from new skills, but, as an overall person. I had an incredible manager, and I'm actually trying to get a hold of him just to see how he is. But he owned the business at the time, as I said, more than 20 years ago, but I still draw on the guidance and the lessons and the experiences I had from that time under his stewardship. And then I found my way into the people space. I remember it was around Christmas, and we were looking for a temp to come in and cover over, we would call Christmas lunches at that time. And a senior manager came in to see me, and we started chatting, and it was her that came up with the idea that I would be effective, but that also I would enjoy being in the people space. Now, what was interesting is that I had zero experience, right? I did not even know what going into the people space meant, or what did human capital mean in those days. It was quite foreign. But she said she saw something. She said she believed that I had the potential for something. So I just trusted her blindly and went into it. And that was the start of my career, let's just say, in human resources. And as you say, over the next few years, I really had the pleasure of being part of remarkable organizations, pharma, financial services, and oil and gas. And I did consult in between as well to an even broader spectrum of industries. And I've also lived and worked outside of South Africa. So this also helped, grow my own exposure and experience across the value chain. And, added to that, I've been fortunate to have worked in contexts that were startup, that were SME, that were established, and even in merger and acquisitions. So, given that we see human resources evolving, the way we see today and contributing to being a strategic business partner. And of course, the technology aspect in the future world of work. It's really, really been a wonderful opportunity. So getting into Microsoft specifically was honestly an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. The conversations were wonderfully warm. They were welcoming. I really felt they were sincerely interested in me and what I wanted. And in fact, that was the majority of the conversation. It was more about me and it was less about Microsoft. And the story is all, by the way, because I've told it so many times because it's such a good story. But with each conversation, I became more and more intrigued and more interested with what I was experiencing on each of those calls. And now I can put a name to it, right? It's obviously the Microsoft culture, but at the time, I was just going through these wonderful conversations and wonderful experiences. And I think I met with about 7 people, different countries, different nationalities, different backgrounds. English was not even the first language of each, but each one of them was uniquely united by this Microsoft culture. And that's what I experienced. And that is the only reason that I joined. So I joined in 2018. I joined the South African business leading human resources. And in July, I accepted the role of HR consulting director for the Middle East and Africa business. And this is an integrated portfolio that focuses on enabling consistent manager and employee experiences. If you look at and listen to the future world of work and people, it's all about experiences, right? The employee experience. And we do this through scale, global scale, impact, manager capability, predictive solutions, through data and insights, and of course, driving HR excellence. So this role or the function of this line of human resources is intended to provide the opportunity to maximize impact. And I find myself in it very fortunate and looking forward to what the future brings.
Well, Jasmine, congratulations. And I believe you are on the move again. You'll be moving out of South Africa into a new role. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So the role stays the same. The one thing about Microsoft is that we have the opportunity to do multiple roles, the same role from different locations. So I'm currently experimenting at the moment, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks I'll have a bit more clarity in terms of what that is. But suffice to say, it's one of those companies where you can plan a long-term career, given the amount of opportunities that come up to reinvent yourself. So hopefully you and I will get a chance to chat in the near future, and I can give you more information on that.
Absolutely. So Jasmine, the aim of this Lift as We Rise podcast is really to influence sustainable business strategies. And at StratAstute Consulting, we focus on strategy to execution, following a model that integrates purpose, performance, people, and profit. So you are heading HR in a key emerging region in a leading tech company at a pivotal point in human history and, of course, in the world of work. What has underpinned your personal approach to human capital management? And I've worked with you, so I've noticed and experienced that it is something different. And how have you applied this to influence the HR strategy at Microsoft and the previous employers you've worked for?
So, Roshni, thank you for that. And I think the first thing that I would say is really understanding what your own personal style is going to be, and because I've worked in HR over what I would call very differing generations. I mean, it's only 20 years, right? 22 years. But the concepts that we have identified now existed many years back, but we didn't identify it in the way that we know it now or become as educated. So if we talk a little bit about my leadership style, I think I was lucky, maybe based on my family, based on my upbringing, that I realized who I was at a very early stage, and some of those traits came through pretty early. I don't know if you've heard of the concept of intersectionality. You've heard of that before?
I have briefly, Jasmine.
Okay.
For us?
Yeah. So for the benefit of our listeners, right, the documented definition, and I'm going to read this, it says, it's the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and independent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Therefore, through an awareness of intersectionality, we can become, or rather, we can better acknowledge or understand or embrace the differences. So hypothetically, I would identify myself as Indian female mom. Okay, there's many aspects to that as an example. Now, when you combine that with diversity, which we know is more than race, religion, color of skin, it's about the experiences that you've had and the choices that you make, and this starts way back before the working world. So our leadership philosophies are then developed far earlier than being in a leadership position. I think you and I actually spoke about this as well previously, or what is commonly defined as a leader role, which is typically usually linked to the size of your team or where you sit in the hierarchy. Now, I'm going somewhere with the story, so bear with me, right? I want to give you a very, very tiny example. I think it was 1979 or 1980. I must have been about 6. And I remember very clearly it was my first day in class 1, or as they call it today, grade 1. And our parents had to drop us off at our designated classrooms, and then they had to leave, right? And in those days, they had benches outside the classroom, one for boys and one for girls. And then you had to sit on the bench and wait for the teacher to take you in. We were never allowed to go into classrooms unless the teacher was in it. So I'm on this bench. And I remember being very, very nervous. I'm the youngest of 4, and all my siblings were older, so I didn't have anyone next to me. I knew nobody, had no friends. Some other kids were crying. So you can imagine as a 6-year-old, right? All of this is pretty nerve-wracking. And to add to that, one of the parents came to me and she was holding her son's hand. And this poor chap was a wreck as well. And he was crying and he was upset. And she made him sit next to me. And she asked me if I would take care of him. And because he was scared and she had to leave. So I said, okay. Now, I can't remember what I said to him, right? But I do remember talking to him. And I do remember trying to help him stop crying. And then in the middle of all of this, the other little girls were really unhappy because they had a boy sitting on the girls' bench. I mean, it was bending the rules. So I decided to move with him to the boys' bench. And I wasn't even welcome there because now there was a girl on the boys' bench. I mean, you can imagine little 6-year-olds and how little boys and little girls didn't want to be in the same space, right? And I stayed with him until we eventually went into class, and I eventually helped him settle down. And he and I became very, very good friends. We remained friends right through primary school, right through high school, and even after high school, very, very good friend. And I know this may seem like an obscure story, but I'll tell you why I'm telling you this story, right? It's a tiny example, but in it I see the makings of the leadership philosophy that I tried to live by, which was, creating the space for others, supporting others, and making sure that the success of others is as important as the success of myself. Now, the other reason this is really important is that I think we sometimes forget that we are more than our job, and we're more than the company that we are part of. And we are more than a leader in the workplace, in the role that we have, and all the collective experiences that we have contribute to who we are. And that helps us in terms of our own style and our own philosophy. So when we think about skills and talent and the future of human resources and human capital, we need to take a broader view. So I always encourage people to take the time to see the whole person in others. There's more to a person than what you see in front of you at that time, in that moment. And when you look deep enough, you'll discover all sorts of skills. Roshni, there's a very famous quote that I quite like. In fact, it sits on my desk here, and it's by Eleanor Roosevelt. And she says, learn from the mistakes of others because you can't live long enough to make them yourself, right? So if we apply that to how we think about leadership and development, same thing. We can never live long enough to experience all the leadership scenarios ourselves. So it means that we have got to learn from others, and that means acknowledging the leader outside the workplace. So in a bit of a nutshell, I would say that my leadership approach, I try, it's certainly not an end game. There's lots of work still to be done, but it's a culmination and an evolution of everything that I've been exposed to. And I call it my tripartite view, which is customer co-creation and continuous investment to actualize aspirations. And this means, firstly, just making sure that you have clarity on what you want to achieve. right? And at the same time, allowing the space to innovate and really embrace that we will arrive at our goal in different ways. And in this way, we allow different talents and different gifts to come through. You've mentioned earlier that I've moved into a new role. It's 73 days today, by the way. And I spent 2 days at an offsite with my team, talking about ways of working, getting to know them and them getting to know me. And we spoke about exactly this, creating an environment for them, for me, building you, building us, where they can speak freely, speak their mind, building trust. And that's the approach that I've taken. I hope it answers the question.
Jasmine, what strikes me is that you can't arrive at these principles and embed them in your leadership philosophy without having experienced it. So your analogy most certainly, encapsulates exactly where that started for you, where the seed was planted and why you have become so intentional about this. And I certainly want to get into diversity and inclusion and that strategy at Microsoft a little bit later. So being a tech company and being a successful one, I always say that sustainable businesses, it doesn't happen overnight. It's years of hard work and effort. And when we see it on the billboards and the headlines, that is a long journey and a story that needs to be told. And with Microsoft, it all started in 1975, right? That's 46 years ago. They listed in 1986. It was founded by Bill Gates and his co-founder, Paul Allen. And since then, there've interestingly been only 2 significant leadership changes in 2000 with Steve Ballmer and with the current CEO and chair Satya Nadella in 2014. Okay. And if I look at the story, it's quite exceptional. I mean, since 1975, every 3 to 5 years, there's been a significant innovation strategy. And since 2000, they've become serial customer-centric innovators. Every single year, something new. Now, we've both worked in an environment that's similar. This is at a different scale that talks about agility, responsiveness, and that means high pressure, high performance. Describe the Microsoft's culture and what keeps it anchored in this fast-paced tech industry that evolves so rapidly.
It's such a great question. And, there are still people in the Microsoft family, by the way, that have lived through what we call the Bill years, the Steve years, and the Satya years. And it's wonderful to hear those stories and not lose it. But thankfully, Microsoft is really, really good at engaging and storytelling. And some of us that have come in only through the Satya years have not lost out. But look, I always enjoy talking about our culture, and had we not had a time limit, but I promise you, I would go over, because it's just such not only a fascinating topic, but why it's so special at Microsoft is because we're held to account not by instruction, but from a pure desire, right, to be part and parcel of what this business is about. So let me outline firstly, what is this Microsoft culture that we constantly talk about? And then I'll share a little bit about how that links into our people strategy. So quite right, Satya was the third CEO. He came in Feb 2014. And when he came on board, he was very clear that culture was going to be the differentiator, and that we needed to be very clear on what the mission of Microsoft was going to be and what the culture was going to be that was going to help this business sustain, even when the strategy and the worldview would evolve over time. Now, given your experience, you've been involved in strategy for many, many years, and it changes, right? It's never static. But what we've identified, or rather, should I say, through Satya's leadership, is understanding that culture is the one thing that's going to remain constant, right, and significant. And this was pivotal. This was pivotal because it also helped us understand what the human resources function would have to do in order to be the strategic partner. So there's a lot of reading and material out there in terms of growth mindset by Carol Dweck, and this is what Microsoft's culture is founded on. And I think what was important and what worked for Microsoft is not just identifying, well, we want a growth mindset culture. What does that mean? How do you be? What do you look for? How do you grow? These are the key questions. So in order to help growth mindset culture be understood and to flourish at Microsoft, the organization identified what we call 4 attributes to help us help growth mindset culture flourish. And the first is being customer obsessed. The second is about diversity and inclusion, but being diverse and inclusion in everything that we do, showing up as one Microsoft, and then, of course, making sure that we don't forget about the lived experience, right? Which is about trying to achieve all of this for our people every day. And then again, it's got to permeate into everything that you do, from your hiring to your development, to your learning, every single thing. So in order for growth mindset to take hold, we had to be very clear on what our belief is, right? And the first is that we absolutely believe that everyone can grow, everyone can develop, and that everyone has potential. So it's not predetermined, but it's nurtured. And, we hear this a lot, Roshni, about staying curious and being comfortable to learn. But sometimes those can turn into just words if you don't actually make sure that you have an environment to make sure that it's a lived experience. And this is where Microsoft spent a lot of time. And, when we talk about serving everyone on the planet, we really need to understand what our customers need. And in order to understand what our customers need, they need to be represented inside Microsoft as well. So this is where we talk about really tapping into the power of diversity and inclusion. It's not just nationality or race, but it's about those experiences that are so, so critical that make each one of us so different. And again, today we're sitting at about circa 180,000 people worldwide, and each one of us is so different. But it's this mission and it's this culture that unites us. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking to me in South Africa, you're talking to somebody in Dubai, you're talking to somebody in Dublin. You can spot a Microsoft person a mile away through how they behave. Now, I want to just say we don't claim to be experts. We haven't perfected it. There's a lot of work to be done. And this is why I love this phrase that Satya always talks about, which is closing the distance between the espoused culture and the lived experience. And this is why I said right at the beginning of my response that it's not an instruction, but a deep, deep desire to be part of this.
So, Jasmine, let's pick up on that point around closing the distance. Because in the environment, particularly over the last 2 years, I've wondered what business leaders at the C-suite levels have been doing around trying to close that gap. Because on a normal day, I found that leaders were becoming more and more disconnected from the day-to-day goings on in the offices in terms of actually connecting and finding the time to connect authentically with their employees. And now in this environment, I'm wondering to what extent that distance has grown, or how intentional leaders have been to bridge that. What has your leadership team done as Microsoft to ensure that the tone at the top continues to sustain this culture that is so well embedded?
Look, I'll answer that in 2 parts, right? So the first is you do need a people strategy that supports what you're trying to do. And I believe in very practical human resource management. It's wonderful to have a plan and to have a strategy, but if the person on the ground does not understand what it is that we're trying to do, then to that point, closing any sort of distance between the espoused culture and the lived experience becomes very, very difficult, right? Even with the deepest of desires and intent. So the first is we've been very particular in terms of making sure that our culture links to our people strategy. And I'll take you through that quite lightly. So look, Microsoft is a significant technology contributor. And, whilst technology is always going to be critical in digital transformation or 4IR as we know it, you're still going to need people to drive transformation. And this is where human resources comes in. And this is where human resources comes in, and the leader management philosophy comes in to make sure that we're closing that distance on the ground or creating the right environment. So we've always made sure that people are at the center of our approach. And there's 4 or 5 key priorities that we focus on. The first is talent that can change the world. right? And this is where we focus on designing career journeys or experience journeys, as we're calling them, that will help us to attract and retain skills that are key to our business and, of course, key to our growth strategies, right? So this means that we need to continue to shape our workforce. We need to continue to transform Microsoft. And, of course, we need to keep shaping our workforce for future fit. Now, the second priority is what we call evolving our culture with a growth mindset. So it's what I mentioned earlier, that we haven't arrived. The job is never done. And here we are really focused on supporting our culture transformation with learning and development. I'll give you a tiny example, right? Managers are key, not just at Microsoft, but in any organization. They're typically the smallest number of people in a company, but given their role, their scope, and their accountabilities, they are one of the, if not the key change agents in an organization. So that reality on the ground in terms of how your culture translates has to link to what you're doing in respect of your manager community. And at Microsoft, we have a very simple philosophy, simple in terms of what we want, but of course, there's a lot of investment and work that goes in. But we focus on modeling, coaching, and caring. What do I want from my manager? I want them to model the behaviors that they're looking for from me. I really want them to coach me when I need it, sometimes when I don't need it and I don't see it. And I honestly really, really want them to care about me. So what we do as an organization and aligned to our people strategy is we partner with our managers and our leaders to help build that manager capability and that excellence capability on the ground so that you, Roshni, are feeling and seeing this culture that we talk about in action. Very, very likely, the others are an exceptional place to work, which ranges from the environment, an environment of inclusion, and an environment where you can have impact. And of course, this also now, when we think about the hybrid workplace, has become so practical in terms of where we work, the tools, the infrastructure, the chair, the desk, all of those things matter. And empowering at scale, which is always about the whole, seeing how we can scale for impact. And then, of course, transformational leadership, which I've already touched on in terms of model coaching care.
Jasmine, let's pick up on that point around excellence. And if we turn our attention to the performance culture, let's call it the high performance culture. The tech industry has been super interesting to monitor. So while businesses in the last 2 years have been focusing on surviving and limiting job losses, the tech company results have delivered stellar returns. I mean, your numbers are no different. Your 2020 revenue was $143 billion, up by 10 billion. Operating profit up from 34% to 37%, the margins. And that's compared to 2017, $97 billion at 30% margins. Per employee, if we look at that revenue, that's around $900,000 per employee. That is a high contribution ratio. Now, in his 2020 letter to shareholders, your CEO said that the past 6 months have served as the largest at-scale experiment that we've ever seen for remote work. He says we've been studying this closely to understand the changing nature of productivity and are applying these learnings to inform how we build our products. Now, he was talking about products. From your perspective, share with us what you had to adapt internally to respond to the requirements of this new normal, the high demand in user requirements, and your employees needing to respond to these rising demands at a very rapid pace, but also trying to keep their balance in the interim?
I'll say this first, right? So COVID or no COVID, hybrid work or no hybrid work, one of the biggest challenges for organizations, and specifically from a human resources perspective in terms of the value that we can add, is how do you get people to work together willingly, happily, and to have impact, right? So all of the success and the numbers and the data that one can view in terms of success, or however a company defines success, has to come as a result of that, right? Working together, wanting to wanting to work together and liking to work together, and obviously finding some success from that. So let me answer this question in a few parts. The first is, I mentioned that we're a very large organization spread across the globe, but we are united in this mission of empowerment and, of course, this culture of growth mindset. But in order to be practical, and I think this is where you may hear me say a few times that it's wonderful to have a strategy and a plan, but unless you actually understand how you can make that real for you on the ground and for your team and for your organization and the bigger Microsoft, it then doesn't really make sense, right? And now we're starting to talk about purpose and all those kinds of things, which we'll park for another conversation. But the most important driver of Microsoft's success, and Satya has said this over and over, is our culture, right? And the other piece, which is part of our growth mindset culture, is operating as one Microsoft. Now, at the heart of this is Microsoft's performance management and development approach, which, to be honest with you, I think is where our golden egg sits, if I can put it that way. So our performance and development approach is structured around a collaborative approach, and it's specifically designed to deliver results through teamwork, right? And this also allows each of us to give and receive feedback that will help each one of us learn and grow, and then in turn deliver the results and rewards contribution to the business impact. So at Microsoft, we define performance as a combination of three things. The first is your impact as an individual to the team and in relation to your individual core priorities and your customer results. And, one can always have impact as an individual, Roshni, but the most powerful ripple impact cannot be achieved just through individual contribution. It can be achieved by applying a successful combination of the three approaches, which is the first, individual contribution. The second is the impact of one contributing to the success of someone else. And the third piece is the impact of leveraging the work of others or building on the work of others. So one of the things we're really, really big about at Microsoft is don't reinvent, don't start from scratch, keep innovating off somebody else's work. So now you've got this triangle, let's just say, right? Individual, team, and contributing to someone's success. So through this collective approach, an individual is able to have more impact, right? They're able to innovate faster. They're able to keep growing more as an individual than they would had they not applied the other two streams. So on the whole, we look at the opportunity for impact, or the person's impact relative to their opportunity for impact. And this is how our culture fits into this, right? We have our core priorities, we have our manager core priorities, our leadership principles, our approach to diversity and inclusion. And it's this entire picture that helps us determine what does success look like at Microsoft. And then you overlay this with, I'm sure you've heard this so many times if you've read anything about Microsoft and listened to anything, is our deep, deep focus on empathy. So the golden question is now, how do we adapt this to support employees, right? And especially through the COVID pandemic. So the first thing is we remain true to ourselves, no matter what came, lockdown, crisis, infections rates rising, it doesn't matter. And COVID-19 is not the only crisis that this world has faced, right? But through all of it, we remain true to our mission, we remain true to our culture, not just for ourselves, but for our customers. And this is important because it helps you build a resilient and an agile organization. So you're not knee-jerking, you're not reacting with the wrong focus and priorities. You're constantly remembering, Microsoft, who are we? What drives us? What are the behaviors that are important? So whether it's a force majeure act that has happened, or whether it's a COVID pandemic, it doesn't matter. You go back to who you are as an individual, as an organization. So we're absolutely embracing a hybrid workplace. I don't know if many people know this, by the way, but I'll just talk specifically about the South African office. Pre-COVID, in fact, globally, Microsoft's always been remote work, flexible work. And the South African office actually technically only caters for 1/3 of the workforce, physical bodies. The balance obviously work from home. So we're continuing to work to build upon the notion of a hybrid workplace model. And there's really four key things, Roshni, that are driving our focus and our planning here. And the first is the physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And I think your very first question was about, I'm paraphrasing, when would Microsoft go back into the workplace? And the answer is when it's right for our people and when it's right for our customers. We're very focused on supporting our employees' needs and the flexibility that they need in their home. And even if they do decide to do a bit of both, home, Microsoft worksite, what is it that they need from us? And then, of course, making sure that we can continually service our customers and continue critical business operations. Microsoft has data centers, as you know, which are critical to the continuation of our customers' businesses. And the last is, we always focus on either meeting or exceeding regulations. I mentioned earlier as well that we are informed by what's happening at a regulatory level, at a country level, at a government level in terms of COVID. But we always seek to either equal or go higher in terms of what the guidance is. And maybe to close out, we've been working remote, Microsoft on the whole, for about 15 years. So flexible work is not new, but we're exploring now, what does it mean to us in this whole COVID pandemic era that is completely new to us? And how can we elevate it on a larger scale? So over the last few months specifically, we've learned a lot about productivity, flexibility, resilience, and compassion. And we've been working in ways that we never thought possible, which includes managing necessary safety precautions, learning how to connect with small teams or big teams whilst presenting to a screen, taking care of family and friends, whilst being on calls. And by the way, you're in the room next to each other, adjusting hours to address new demands and much more. And, we've also thought about what does flexibility mean to each one of us. And I think where we've landed is that there isn't a blueprint, Roshni, that we can say, this is the plan, we're going to do this for you, we're going to do this for you, because each context is so different. But what we've focused on doing is creating enough flexibility so that you can decide and design what works for you based on your own needs. And then, of course, in terms of your customers as well. So we've put in place lots of guidance, lots of guidelines in terms of what does it mean to change your work site? What does it mean to change your work location? Do you want to reduce your hours by 50%? Do you want to work at another location completely? What does it mean in terms of office space, salary, benefits, local law, personal taxes, expenses? And we've been working on this for the last 18 months. And as we continue to learn, we'll certainly continue to evolve and remain flexible in our approach going forward.
Now, Jasmine, what the last 18 months have shown up is one can no longer de-link behavioral aspects from human capital strategies. And you spoke about empathy being a core value within the Microsoft world. And just over the last year, the studies are showing that the level of empathy amongst leadership towards their teams has increased by 62% simply because of our hybrid working environment. But on the other end of the scale, we're seeing higher levels of burnout. I mean, overtime worked voluntarily by employees has grown by between 20 to 45% in some areas. And that simply is not sustainable, right? So these increased levels of productivities using a digitized solution has to be balanced more intentionally with ensuring that even though the employees can't proverbially clock in and clock out at certain hours, that in their own space, they are upholding these boundaries. So from a leadership perspective, positioning human capital as a strategy rather than a transactional function as it used to be in many instances, to me is becoming absolutely vital to sustainable business models. Just before we hop on to this topic around performance culture, what is excellence at Microsoft and how do you reward that?
So I just want to tap onto something before we get onto that question, because you said something so interesting. I can tell you now, when we went to mandatory work from home, and I consider myself personally someone that has honed my working style in terms of my hours and when I'm effective, when I, have my own, when I'm more effective in terms of my own thinking time, etc. But I was not an exception to, I'm going to use this word deliberately, the chaos of work from home. We literally went from office to home. And I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened to the time that I commuted, even the time that you took to get dressed, because trust me, I'm not dressing for work. When I was physically in the office, the way I'm dressing virtually. I mean, it's a fact of life, right? So I looked at all those bits and pieces of time and I was trying to figure out what on earth happened to it. It's not as though the job has changed 180 degrees in a year. Of course, the world has changed and the way we do things has changed. But what has changed so drastically that even in my own personal life, I couldn't figure out what this balance was. And it took me a while. And this is why you cannot go wrong with data and analytics. This is where workplace analytics and all of those insights come into play so that you can figure out, where am I spending my time? What am I spending? Who am I spending my time with? Et cetera, et cetera. And through workplace analytics, the best part is that it's totally personal, right? It's for you, and you can use those insights as you see fit to adjust what you do, when you do it, how you do it, with whom you do it. And it took me, if I have to be very honest with you, Roshni, it took me about 3 to 4 months before I actually started to pay attention to my own analytics. And then I thought on the one day, let me just try this, right? And I accepted all the analytics suggestions. And of course, the technology plopped in some time in my diary, focus time. And I thought, okay, this is great. This is great. And through the acceptance of not wanting to be entirely in control and accepting, hey, this is new information, I can do something. Now that's me. That's you. That's a person. But when you think about workplace analytics and the intelligence this gives leadership across the business, they can see, okay, my goodness, we have a challenge here. 50% of my organization are working overtime for X amount of time. Why? Right? And then when you're thinking about manager capability, when you're thinking about learning and skills development, you're now very particular in terms of what you do. So let me get to your question. I just thought that was so important and I didn't want to lose it. So what is excellence at Microsoft? I think firstly, I have to go back to this growth mindset culture, right? It doesn't sit in a book somewhere and it doesn't sit on a wall somewhere. It's present in every single thing we do, from my core priorities, so whatever I have to deliver for the next fiscal. Our culture is embedded in that. It's embedded in how we engage, how we teach, how we learn, how we model, how we coach, how we care. And how we derive impact. So if I'm having a conversation with my manager, I should be able to tell her the impact that I have had over the last 12 months, not what I did, not the things I did, but the impact that I've had. Let me give you an example. If we're putting together a session on manager capability, right? And one of them happens to be about, let's say, well-being, given COVID. Okay. And to go deeper, it may mean, how do I help you, Roshni, as a manager, or equip you with the capability to have a conversation with your employee in a time of COVID where it's remote, it's hybrid, you've got to think about team agreements, et cetera, et cetera. So what does excellence look like? It looks like, what have I done to have impact in a space for the business, for the customer? I know that sounds like a very simple example, but if you take all the noise away, it really, really is about the impact that one has in relation to the opportunity that you have. And, what's also important is that there's no individual heroes. I think if you want to be a superstar by yourself, earning all the accolades, Microsoft's not the place for you, right? But if you want to be a team player, you want to be independently successful, and you want to contribute to your team, and you want to contribute to the success of someone else, and perhaps you get nothing from it, Microsoft is the place for you. So excellence is about living that growth mindset culture every single day in everything that you do.
Jasmine, the word that comes to mind just listening to you to sum it up is the focus on outcomes and ownership. And And, historically, this has been positioned and measured for leadership and executives. It seems like this is an integrated philosophy within Microsoft for every person, irrespective of where you sit or what your role is. And the recognition that every person has the potential to make a difference to the targeted outcome strategically. And that almost leads to a better sense of belonging, which is what I want to get into now, is the whole topic around diversity and inclusion, which has come to the spotlight largely in the last 18 months following Black Lives Matter, etc. But you and I have grown up and worked in South Africa. And to us, this has been a priority for many, many years. As female leaders, from historically advantaged backgrounds, I think we have experienced this personally. So your Chief People Officer, Kathleen Hogan, says there has never been a more important time to build a workforce that is diverse and a culture that is inclusive. The past year has transformed our workplaces, she says, and challenged us both personally and professionally, calling us to engage with a renewed focus on community and commitment to one another. We are dedicated to listen, learn, and lead by example. Your CEO echoes that, saying we need to ensure that our culture of inclusion is top priority for everyone. Each one of us must be able to thrive in diverse teams. Jasmine, I read the Microsoft Diversity and Inclusion report with great interest, and I want to understand three parts of that strategy: allyship and what that means, the focus on female empowerment and how you've got that in inverted commas right at Microsoft, and the unwavered commitment to neurodiversity and disability, which is an area I'm particularly interested in. So in the interest of time, I'll leave it there. Can you maybe unpack for us those three aspects and how they have been activated at Microsoft and also helped to gain a strategic advantage in the sector?
Sure. So let me answer this by going straight to what we call our inclusive capabilities, because whatever we do manifests in something. And the some things that you particularly mentioned are the allyship, female empowerment, and of course, the contribution to neurodiversity. But it has to start somewhere, right? Now, yes, maybe a strategy is developed to give you something specific, but the best strategy or environment is one that will give you even the things that you don't even know you can get, right? And this is why I want to talk about Microsoft's inclusive capabilities, which is the how. Roshni, I'm really, really big on it. I think I've said it 3 or 4 times already. It's wonderful to have a plan, but unless you can break it down to what it means for you and me in the workplace, it really loses its value, right? We have 3 inclusive capabilities. The first is practicing awareness. The second is exercising curiosity. And the third is demonstrating courage. What does that mean? Practicing awareness is about understanding the limits of your own perspective and being alert to the different kinds of unconscious bias and systemic biases, by the way, that can make others feel excluded. Perfect example is female empowerment. When you look at the numbers, right? The data and the numbers speak for themselves. So what it means is that we've got to continuously be aware of the fact that we have biases, right? And that we don't see or that we're not aware of, and that we need to take steps to mitigate them. The second is about knowing the conditions around us that may lead us to be non-inclusive. So as an example, I know this is going to sound silly, but when you're in a hurry, time pressure can change who you are. When you're hungry, physiologically, don't separate it. It makes you react in a separate way, right? Exercising curiosity is about as a human being, we have a natural urge to judge people, judge their ideas, judge their behaviors, their perspectives, their clothing, whatever the case may be, right? And especially when it's something we haven't tried, so we're first to criticize. And this is data, by the way, right? Research has shown us that. So exercising curiosity is about keeping an open mind. It's about exercising empathy. It's about really taking an active interest in what you think, your feelings, and look at the situation from your point of view. And this is the bedrock of growth mindset. And demonstrating courage is the last inclusive capability that we focus on. And here, the ultimate goal is to take meaningful action, right? To contribute to a collective culture of inclusion. So put those three together. Awareness is the catalyst for action. Curiosity informs the action that we take, and demonstrating courage is to actually create a space that empowers others to share their perspectives or be. So from an allyship perspective, very simply, there's a lot of teaching at Microsoft, but if I can sum it up in one sentence for you, we talk about allyship as being an ally to one means being an adversary to none. And if you come across a situation where you find that someone's not being inclusive or they're treating someone in a different way and you want to be an ally, counter your natural reaction to say, why are you doing that? Why are you making this person feel that way? Because now you're not being an ally to that person either, right? So this whole allyship topic is so big and so vast, and I wish we had more time. And the female diversity, let's call it female diversity, because there's different parts of diversity that Microsoft looks at, by the way, not just gender and race, right? But inclusivity across the board. And what we've done at the organization is we've created employee resource groups that are created by employees for employees. So as an example, we have Gleam, which is for the LGBTQI plus community. We have Women at Microsoft, Aspire at Microsoft, which is our graduates. And the whole intent is to give the space the opportunity for conversation, support, coaching, mentorship, friendship, empathy, right? And when you create understanding, then you create the space for something to shift, whether that's female empowerment, whether that's allyship, or whatever the case may be. So this is why I say it's about having the right ingredients in your cake so that you can produce so many things and not just one. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I just want to, for the benefit of the listeners, the definition of allyship at Microsoft says an ally is someone who makes the intentional decision to understand, empathize, and act in support of someone else. It is not a person's identity, as Jasmine said, but rather a lifelong commitment and practice, which links to the friendship term. And looking at females, Jasmine, that has been a concern around the underrepresentation of females in tech and tech leadership positions. And at Microsoft, your numbers are showing progress, 29% representation in the US. And as far as salary parity goes, an average of a ratio of $1 for every $1 earned by male, similar $1 earned by females, which is heading in the right direction. An area you haven't touched on, and which is really interesting, is the commitment to neurodiversity. And we know that your CEO's son suffers from cerebral palsy. And I don't want to use the word suffer, has a condition called cerebral palsy. And in my personal space, I have loved ones who suffer from disabilities or have neurodiverse thinking styles. And, what one realizes when you're living close to the situation is how complex and challenging our world is because of standardized constructs, which someone who's slightly different cannot fit into. So you actually are limiting the person's ability to thrive, just because we're not enabling that talent to come out. And I know of many top athletes and entrepreneurs who fall into one of these categories. Jasmine, how have you activated that philosophy at Microsoft quickly?
Yeah. So look, disability, it falls under, let's talk disabilities at Microsoft. And one of the areas that this organization has focused on very, very heavily is firstly, disability awareness, understanding, and thirdly, being very practical in terms of making sure that Microsoft creates the opportunities for equal opportunity or equal employment. We have, and of course we don't disclose personal identifiers because it is private information, but we have individuals employed at Microsoft that are on the spectrum. Medical aid data will show you that the highest number of claims, by the way, is not physical, it's mental, and it covers multiple disabilities. We've spent a lot of time and effort on not just the education and the awareness. but also on the manager capability, the employee capability, making sure that we understand what does it mean, what does disability mean. The second thing that we've done is creating specific opportunities, being very intentional that we don't exclude, right? And this is why I keep going back to this piece about if we want to shift the needle on female hiring, or if we want to shift the needle on doing something meaningful on disability hiring, as an example, you absolutely can do that, and Microsoft has done that. But now you bring in someone into the business, now what? It doesn't stop there. This is why I say the entire scope of what does it mean if we're just talking about disability for a second, right? What does it mean in terms of being completely open, completely inclusive, non-biased, allowing individuals to come in with their different talents, their different skills, and their different gifts, and allowing them to thrive. And again, this talks to representation, right? Because there's about 1 billion, I think, people with disabilities on the planet. Now, can you imagine if they're not represented? And that percentage also sits within our customers. So this is why we talk about Microsoft being represented inside as much as we're represented in terms of servicing our customers. So very, very short, Roshni, we're very intentional about being inclusive.
Jasmine, thank you very much for that. We can't talk about Microsoft without looking into the future. And your CEO says that the world is at an inflection point and digital technology will be key to defining what comes next. Absolutely. What should leaders and boards be thinking about when they're considering building better strategies as far as human and social capital goes?
Look, I mean, very, very quickly, the World Economic Forum's Future of Work report highlights the following top skills, right? Up to 2025. Problem solving, critical thinking, analysis, reasoning, self-management, resilience, stress tolerance, flexibility, working with people, etc., etc. I think when we look at this, and when we also look at the Mercer data that's come out in terms of the changing workplace, there's multiple things: augmented humanity, diversity and inclusion, purpose, culture, company stance. But the one thing that comes through really critically is agility and learning agility, right? If you stand still as an organization and if you stop learning, you're going to be in trouble. This is why we constantly say it's the learner mindset that will survive. So if I had to sum all of that up into one point, because there's so many caveats to it, right? There's so many avenues. The focus for me is understanding, firstly, that the world we're moving into is changing so much that you're going to have to develop a whole new mindset, a whole new level of skill. You have to totally change and be brave about the strategies that you want to adopt and really pull yourself out of your comfort zone and learn about what culture means in terms of your organization. Learn about what inclusivity means. Learn about what kind of company you want to be, and then be brave enough to take the action. I think the hardest thing I've seen in my personal experience, and I talk to lots of people from different industries, is the fear of leaving behind what you know. We tend to sort of stick with what we know and try and shift it here and shape it there and innovate a little bit. But the future of work in terms of 4IR and human capital means we're going to have to turn this on its axis. And it comes with being brave and absolutely adopting a learner mindset. There isn't a single part of our business that I believe is going to stay the same. Nor should it, by the way. So we're going to need leadership teams that are really brave and willing to make some significant changes within the organization.
Jasmine, back to the present, and I want to, consider the fact that there's always been a concern in boardroom between, let's call it the trade-off, between employing people and investing in technology. Now, your 2020 annual report confirms a commitment to say that Microsoft is making efforts to help ensure that no one is left behind, particularly as economies start to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that LinkedIn is a Microsoft platform connecting more than 706 million professionals. And last week, there was an announcement that Microsoft has acquired a platform called Take Lessons. So there's a huge intention around training, which is what you've pointed out. what notes should business leaders be taking, particularly on a continent like Africa, where we are lagging so far behind the developed countries in terms of technology and access to technology?
Yeah, and I think the first thing I'll say here is that you cannot be a company in a country, in a continent, and serve your company. You have to serve the community that you're in, which is why, and there's a lot of information about Microsoft on this in terms of what it does to support investment in skilling, community development. There's a host of activities or initiatives that I could talk you through. But if I could give you our approach to the continent, South Africa, in three parts very quickly, right? Capability, competitiveness, and confidence. So from a capability perspective, and I've mentioned augmented humanity, by the way, it's not either or, it's both. You need technology and you need people. And if we can, educate ourselves and get past the fear that it's a better together story, it's not one or the other. Think about all the revolutions we've been through, right, in terms of development. You didn't leave behind people or write off masses amounts of the population, but you've got to invest in skilling. So Microsoft is really committed, to helping every company and every person prepare for digital revolution. And this is linked to also how we reshape the labor market. And this is why we've partnered with business, with governments, nonprofits, educational institutions, and already those who are in the workforce to try and re-enter the workforce and build new skills, right? So the first is skilling is paramount. You have to play a role. You have to invest. You cannot sit on the sidelines. And I think this is where Microsoft has done a phenomenal job. The second piece is from a competitive perspective. I don't know, Roshni, that there's a sector or industry or area that cannot benefit from digital technology. I think the writing is on the wall in terms of where we see evolution. And, especially when we're seeing powerful technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning. So this enables product development, service development, and this drives economic growth, right, through job creation, talent magnets, and obviously significant sources of export. So Microsoft has invested in local DCs on the continent, and this will provide the backbone for the continent's cloud computing and networking services. And this is heavy investment that recognizes the enormous opportunity for digital transformation in Africa and a key milestone in terms of our own empowerment. And the last piece is confidence. And I'm going through this quite lightly. The ongoing integration of digital products and services depends on user protection, right? We take our role as a tech leader very, very seriously. And we also accept our responsibility to consider the impact of technology on people, on business, and society. So this is why Microsoft has been very intentional to partner with government, policymakers, the public, civil and private sectors, and other bodies, right, to establish policy, legal, and regulatory frameworks to create demand and to also scale up digital initiatives. And we underpin this by our 4 pillars of security, privacy, compliance, and transparency. So digitizing, or rather strengthening collaboration between African institutions and regulators in charge of digitization is core to this mission.
Thanks, Jasmine. Your founders, Bill Gates says, as we look ahead into the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. And it sounds like your CEO, your chairperson, Microsoft as a company is certainly doing that. And you, Jasmine, as a leader in the human capital space, have always done that, and you continue to do that. So it's been an intriguing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your nuggets with us today. And it's been quite difficult packing it all into an hour, but we really appreciate what you have shared with us.
Thank you, Roshni. And I'm really humbled by the opportunity. And thanks so much for the chance to have this conversation.
And Jasmine, wishing you well in your new ventures and, of course, rooting for your continued success. Listeners, to you, thank you for joining our podcast, your time, your interest. Please share your comments and feedback, as we'd love to know how these talks resonate with you and inform your business strategies. Head over to www.stratastute.co.za if your business has reached a strategic choice point. And you can subscribe to the StratConnect podcast channel to receive information around our next updates. Thanks also to our tech partner, Mobi Learn Africa, who are doing some amazing work to assist citizenry in unlocking the full potential of smartphones and other mobile devices. Remember, in all you do, lift as we rise so that together we can thrive. Till next time, take care and bye-bye.